The Legend of Zelda series has morphed and evolved since its introduction into the gaming world over 40 years ago. As an homage to the series' longevity and variety, I thought it would be an interesting exercise to definitively classify the mainline games into distinct eras. But how exactly does one best define and organize these eras? Well, let's find out. First, I was intrigued to approach this exercise not just as a Zelda fan, but as the video game equivalent of, I'll use these terms loosely, an anthropologist or historian or geologist. I'll get to that one in a second. See, Zelda at its core has always been about exploration and adventure, just as human history has been about, well, human behavior and our interaction with the world. But like humanity, how Zelda has interpreted its core identity and expressed that identity in its games can sometimes seem as different as the Bronze Age from the Industrial Revolution. So my first step in determining how to split up the games was to more specifically define how exploration and adventure are structured across the breadth of Zelda history. That led me to 3 distinct eras. My next issue came at the borders. Sure, most games fit nicely into a particular era, but some games flirt with a bolder structure, a prelude to something even more radical. Historians often cite the end of the classical period and the start of the Middle Ages around 476 AD, when Rome fell. But Rome wasn't built in a day, and it sure as heck didn't fall in a day. But who can really pinpoint when that fall began? Even the Enlightenment straddles the border between the early modern era and the modern era. And as a particular goal of this exercise, I didn't want to be wishy-washy. I wanted a framework that could reliably categorize this series. This is where the geologist comes in. See, geologists have also managed to classify Earth into specific eras. And they can do this a bit more cleanly by looking at the fossil record. Certain fossils occur in older layers and no longer occur in younger layers. In this way, some borders between geologic eras are differentiated by mass extinction events. Events that wiped out at least 75% of living species at that time and altered both the evolutionary trajectory of life and more cleanly stratified the fossil record as we currently understand it. Now, life has gone through the big 5 mass extinction events, which in the grand scheme of geologic time is not that many. Similarly, in the 40-year history of Zelda, there have been a few truly earth-shattering entries, but not that many. All that's a long-winded way to say that I use this principle to select 3 Zelda games as what I call paradigm shifts, which not only changed or established a particular way of implementing the spirit of exploration and adventure into the Zelda series, but more broadly changed gaming, both design-wise and culturally. And so they act as the definitive borders between Zelda eras. I further subdivided these eras into periods, like the Cretaceous, Jurassic, and Triassic, all of which occur in the larger Mesozoic era. Most notably, I called these liminal periods, transitional periods where the ideas for what would later become paradigm shifts first began to take root as design choices in earlier games. So to summarize all that, we have 3 distinct eras defined by their overarching design philosophies, definitively separated by paradigm-shifting entries, which occur after liminal periods where ideas are just beginning to blossom in prior games before exploding into those vibrant paradigm shifts. Whew! So before I start going through which games fall into which eras, there is one more era we need to discuss. Of course, video games did exist prior to Zelda, in a time that I'll refer to as pre-Zelda history. In this before time, the more popular games, arcade games, were designed around individual levels which incrementally increased in complexity and difficulty, pitting players against each other to see who could achieve the highest scores and spend the most quarters. Games like Pac-Man, Space Invaders, and Nintendo's own Donkey Kong were all the rage. Even Nintendo's earliest console games, like the original Mario Bros, were built around individual levels and high scores. Now you may be wondering, what does all of this have to do with anything? Well, it's difficult to understand why a game's introduction is a paradigm shift if you're unfamiliar with the paradigm being shifted. In that sense, The Legend of Zelda, released in 1986, though not the first action-adventure game, revolutionized gaming by creating the defining action-adventure game. Not based on high scores, but on open exploration, real-time combat, and a sprawling sense of adventure. An antithesis to the wave of arcade fever that had come before. And so the original Legend of Zelda begins the first era, the primordial era. The Primordial Era is a strange one because in the earliest Zelda games, the franchise was so fresh, it was still finding its identity. As such, subsequent games could be radically different from their predecessors. This era, therefore, is more accurately defined by its overall lack of strict design cohesion, though each game within this era is here because they would contribute foundational principles to future titles in their own way. The initial paradigm-shifting Zelda 1 introduced the real-time interplay between sprawling overworld and labyrinthine dungeons. Zelda 2, the gradual unlocking of the world as items are gained and more progress is made, as well as a greater emphasis on combat. A Link to the Past, the narrative and gameplay structure, and Link's Awakening, an atmosphere enhanced by a strong yet simple story and endearing yet mysterious side characters. The liminal period begins with A Link to the Past, as it was the first game to introduce what is commonly referred to as the Zelda formula, and introducing dungeons that weren't just navigation or combat challenges, but also more puzzle-focused, while Link's Awakening was considered the first Zelda game with a proper story, and one current series producer Eiji Aonuma credits with directly inspiring its successor. Speaking of, if you'd like a recipe for a paradigm shift, combine all those foundational elements, add a tinge of the third dimension, and you're bound to shake the earth. And so begins the next era. The traditional era begins with a game that needs no introduction, The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. Not only did it codify the structure as first implemented in A Link to the Past, which would eventually become the series' defining characteristic for almost 2 decades to come, and embracing a heavier focus on storytelling, its innovative gameplay practically defined the 3D adventure game as we know it today. On top of which it was, at its release, a cultural juggernaut, and to this day still considered one of the greatest games of all time. The majority of the remaining games in this era are here because they all fit into what I call the Zelda design cake. That is, there are a series of design choices built up in layers, with the most fundamental layers remaining consistent and subsequent layers becoming more varied. The Zelda formula, explore the overworld, find a dungeon, find an item in that dungeon, use that item to complete the dungeon and open more of the overworld, rinse and repeat, serves as the deepest layer. It is the main ingredients that make the cake batter: the sugar, the flour, the butter, the milk, etc. The next layer is the mode by which this formula is facilitated. The flavor: chocolate, red velvet, vanilla, you get it, that separates one cake from the other. The masks and the 3-day time cycle are the flavor of Majora's Mask, the Wind Waker and sailing of the Wind Waker, the train and flute and spirit tracks, etc. And the way the cake is decorated are the particular themes, items, story beats, or art direction of each game. The point is, they are all cakes, not pies or donuts or some other confectionery treat. A period within this era known as the multiplayer period houses this era's 3 outliers, which have an entirely different design ethos than any of the single-player games. And they are certainly not trying to be single-player games. Which leaves us with the traditional era's liminal period. First is perhaps a weird one in Skyward Sword. Not only did it begin to introduce design elements like the stamina wheel, shield durability, and weapon upgrades, it also marked a design shift by the developers who called it a return to fundamentals and a revolution, but also making it more closely resemble Mario Course Selection. Second is A Link Between Worlds, the first game designed around an item rental system to grant players more freedom in how they chose to tackle dungeons. This new emphasis on freedom, the rethinking of conventions, and the reaction to the design of Skyward Sword would shake the earth yet again, and usher in the franchise's next era. The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild, besides being the best-selling Zelda game of all time, not only redefined the open-world genre, it also redefined what a Zelda game could be. Begun the liberational era has, which maybe isn't a word exactly, but it means freedom, and I wanted some symmetry between the names of eras, and damn it, I'm gonna get it. Gone were the steps of the familiar Zelda formula, and in its place, all the tools you'd need are acquired in a brief tutorial, and the rest would rest on your wits and whims. There were hundreds of things to gather and challenge, an emphasis on a vast overworld in place of complex and sprawling dungeons, and a story that could be engaged with as much or as little as you'd like. The adventure was truly the individual's. Tears of the Kingdom would double down and expand on this design ethos, adding even more ways to express your creativity and problem solving, but like Breath of the Wild, not without criticism. Cue the series' most recent entry, Echoes of Wisdom, which re-implements a similar structure to A Link to the Past and its ilk, mainly reintroducing more traditional dungeons, and an overall structure of a first arc, a major story reveal, a second arc, and a finale, all while maintaining the freedom of the era of the Wilds games within each arc. In that sense, the Zelda series may have already entered a new liminal period, leading to another paradigm shift. Though this one may not be such a radical transformation like Breath of the Wild, but more of an evolution of the two previous eras combined into something wholly unique. So there you have it, my take on the eras of Zelda. The Primordial Era, characterized by experimentation with finding the series' identity. The Traditional Era, characterized by a refined and iterated upon formula. And the Liberational Era, characterized by rethinking the conventions of the previous era with a heavy focus on freedom and player choice, with each era defined by the paradigm-shifting games The Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time, and Breath of the Wild. As always, this is my interpretation of these games. Feel free to share yours in the comments below. A special shout out to a connoisseur of the channel, Silent Coda, for suggesting the topic. If you like what we do here, consider subscribing to the channel. A special thanks to our channel members, and as always, thanks for watching.